AR and VR are taking the world by storm right now. Whether it's the Apple Vision Pro or the Meta Quest Pro, big, ugly headsets are a thing of the future whether you like it or not. When PSVR 2 was first released, although I was excited by the concept, I was still a bit apprehensive to drop nearly £600 on a console accessory that had few games to play at the time. However, my curiosity has gotten the better of me, and I've decided to jump in headset first and give it a go. Hi guys, Sam here and welcome to Unit 16. Yeah, I know I'm a little late to the party with this one, but I've finally given in to the temptation. The 4K HDR-enabled OLED VR screen just couldn't wait any longer. This PSVR 2 is Sony's second attempt at virtual reality, and it's got a lot of people talking. So I've spent the last couple of weeks dropping countless hours into the world of VR, getting to know what this headset really has to offer. And I think it's about time I shared my thoughts with you guys. And just a little hint, this might be one of the best VR experiences I've had to date. Now, having experienced a couple of different VR headsets in the past, like the Meta Quest 2, the first generation PSVR, or the Valve Index, when it comes to price, this one isn't cheap and comes in at $529.99 RRP, meaning it's actually more expensive than the PS5 itself, which you'll also need for this to work. So you're looking at around £1,000 for the whole setup if you're coming in cold. But stick with me on this one, because when it comes to specs, this really is where it's at. Not only is the PSVR 2 hands down better than the Gen 1 version in every single way, it's also got enough in the locker when it comes to specs to really compete with the high-end headsets in the market right now. First off, let's talk design though, because straight out of the box, there's no denying that this one is cut from the same cloth as its predecessor, and I don't actually mind that. We've got this combination of a white plastic outer shell and this black cushioning and rubber detailing to create the classic Sony styling that neatly matches the PS5, and it works really well actually. It's a pretty lightweight design overall, weighing 560 grams, which is about what I'd expect from something like this. You've got your 4 tracking cameras on the front here, and then your power and pass-through buttons on the base of the VR unit too. So really simple and minimalistic in terms of controls. Obviously this VR headset is tethered, so you've got a pretty thin 4-meter single USB-C tether attached directly, so no, you haven't got the freedom of something like a Quest Pro when you're playing, but I assume that's where Sony will eventually want to get to with this one. But you will benefit from the enhanced processing power of the PS5 itself, and you should have more than enough leeway to move about with, especially considering Sony only recommend using a 2x2 meter play area during setup. I can just see people tripping over the wire left, right and center though, so I would have quite liked a slightly different design there, but I guess we can't have it all. You'll also see that there's a 3.5mm jack on the headband for the standard Sony stereo headphones that you get with the PSVR 2. They slot in nicely like this, and there's 2 neat storage pockets on each side for the earbuds to sit in when not in use, which is ideal. In terms of actually getting the headset on, they've made things really easy here. You've got this adjustable head strap that's actually separate from the VR display. You can adjust the size to fit exactly what you need, which is really great, I think. Now, one massive bugbear I've had with some of the other headsets on the market is that they do feel like a lot of the weight sits right in the front of your face, and you just don't get that with this one. Instead, it feels like the heavy lifting is done by the top of your head, which is definitely a more comfortable solution for those long gaming sessions. Looking at the VR unit itself, you've got this adjustment button here to alter the distance of the lenses from your face, and this silicone skirt that does a surprisingly good job of blocking out pretty much all of the light when you're playing, but barely puts any pressure on your face, and does a great job at stopping those red rings that you get when something's been on too tight. And I can wear my glasses while playing too, which is a bonus. Once the headset's on, there's also this little wheel here to adjust your interpupillary distance, or IPD, and all that does is adjust the lenses to suit the width between your pupils, but you'll see all of that action during setup. What about the Sense controllers then? Well, these are one hell of an upgrade on the old motion controllers of the PSVR 1 that looked questionable at the best of times. These look and feel like actual VR controllers. They're tactile, premium, and feel familiar enough to PlayStation users that you'd know exactly how to use them without having touched one before, which is a big plus. Now, these are pretty feature-packed too. You've obviously got your adaptive triggers and haptic feedback that we see in the standard PS5 DualSense controllers, but there's also the addition of capacitive touch too, so you can make a couple of basic gestures in VR just by moving your hands. All of these little features combine to step up the immersion and really place you at the heart of the VR experience. You don't just feel immersed during the obvious moments, like in combat in Horizon, but they also really help to enhance those subtle nuances in the slower paced games that you might overlook. When it comes to battery life, you're going to get about 4 to 5 hours out of each of these when they're fully charged, which should be enough for a long gaming session, but that's about it. So you'll probably want these on charge after every decent session, which isn't very practical, and you can run the risk of being cut short next time out, which is a bit of a nightmare. I know there is a charging dock, which looks a bit neater and charges both at the same time for around 40 quid, which might be worth taking a look at if you're interested, but it's just annoying that you've got to make another purchase to really get this firing on all cylinders. Now, when it comes to setup, it's really as simple as it's going to get when it comes to VR, which is nuts when you consider how convoluted the original process of setting up the PSVR was. This time around, it's one USB-C straight into the front of the console and you're good to go. You'll be asked to do a quick firmware update, then you'll have to calibrate your controllers, which will need to be charged before you use them. Then you'll need to complete the eye tracking and lens spacing calibration too, and then you're pretty much ready to carve out your play area. Your 4 tracking cameras will scan the exact geometry of the room and everything in it, and then you can alter the space to perfectly suit you. Once that's all done, you're up and running. Simple as that. I know for a fact if you're new to VR, then this is going to feel a little bit alien at first, but take it from me, this is as simple as it gets. Right, what about what we're all here for then? How does this thing actually perform for gaming? Well, as VR goes, I've been left pretty impressed with this one. We've played around with a lot of games like Horizon Call of the Mountain, Gran Turismo 7, Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge, and so on. The visuals from the 4K HDR OLED screen were stunning. The colours were rich, sharp, and so cinematic, especially in games like Horizon. You get those deep and inky blacks in places, and although it isn't the brightest display I've ever seen, the HDR effect is realistic, and colours are still vibrant enough to enjoy those really colourful gaming worlds. The shadows are really detailed too, and there was very little blooming or washed out colour that I could notice. I've obviously played the Horizon games on console before, but the gameplay actually felt so refreshing initially in VR, which I wasn't expecting at all. Now, I know it's been a while since I've gotten hands-on with the PSVR 1, but you can tell that this second-gen version really is a huge step up. And I think I'd go as far to say it outdoes some of the best PC VR units out there too. You can definitely notice that in large field of view straight off the bat with this one as well. It made me feel small, even in the world that I recognize from console gaming. And it really took the whole experience to the next level when it came to realism and immersion. The use of eye tracking in game was a massive plus visually too. To even have this sort of functionality in a VR unit at this price point is huge. And although I was a little skeptical about the whole foveated rendering thing, I've got to hold my hands up, it works really, really well. If you're not sure what it is, basically the headset knows exactly what you're looking at and prioritizes processing that specific section of the screen. The transition is instantaneous, and although I was convinced I'd be able to see something like that happen in real time, I couldn't notice any resolution or texture changes that I've seen from other VR headsets, so props for that one. Gran Turismo 7 was a great example of this. You could see so much further down the track than you can when you're gaming regularly with those really vast draw distances. And although it's only a subtle difference, it definitely helped me better judge my braking zones, adjust to any obstacles or track changes way before I normally would, so top marks from me on that one. That wasn't all eye tracking could do either. Glances could do things like open menus and start conversations with certain characters in specific games, which is a cool bit of functionality and attention to detail that I was a really big fan of. The finger tracking on the controllers is a nice touch too. It's these little bits of finesse that make the whole experience feel a lot more enjoyable to play. I mean, no, you're not a full range of motion just yet, and you're limited to some really simple gestures with the finger tracking, but it's a great step and proof of what can be done in the future. Call of the Mountain was probably the truest reflection of how fine-tuned the controls were though, as the world was just so interactable. There were loads of objects that you can pick up and play with, and even things like moss on the ground felt so textured and moved when you interacted with it, which is something that you just wouldn't be able to notice in regular console gaming. The haptic feedback and adaptive triggers from the Sense controllers were really immersive, but if you've played a PS5 before, you'll know all about that. The big thing for me was the vibrations that come from the headset itself. Not only were you getting realistic reverberations when you draw a bow or fire an A280 blaster rifle in your hands, but you could feel when you were in close quarters combat through the headset vibrations too, which really intensified the tension of combat a lot. In terms of audio, the headset and stereo earphones were naturally the better option for making things more immersive as opposed to TV audio, but I just couldn't get along with the earbuds at all. There's a couple of replaceable tips in the box, so you can change them out if you want to, but I just found myself using the TV most of the time, which was a real shame. You can get your hands on a wireless over-ear headset instead if you fancy it, and I'd probably say this is the way to go if you want complete VR immersion, but the choice is going to be up to you. I did notice a couple of other drawbacks to the PSVR 2 as well, and the first of those is pretty obvious. It's that tether. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand that without it, you're not going to get all those impressive visuals that I've been such a big fan of, but it can really be annoying when you get tangled up and you have to pause the game, take off the headset, untangle yourself before you can continue playing. Along with that, another thing I struggled with was the repetitive gameplay. You can tell that some of the developers have nailed a few of the mechanics like climb in and craft in, but you're forced to do these things over and over again. Naturally, more in-depth story-based games did make up for this, but there's just not loads of choice out there right now, which is inevitably one of the big drawbacks of the PSVR 2. Once the novelty wore off, gameplay got old pretty quickly, and even in Horizon, where you've got things like combat to really mix it up, due to the lack of movement you get, it felt a little monotonous and a bit arcadey by the very end. I wouldn't say I necessarily see this as a long-term issue, and I do think more will be done over the coming months and years, but I think it hits one of the biggest issues with VR right now. It's clever, really clever, but if you haven't got the expansive list of games just yet, like the Quest does with access to Steam, is it still just a little too early? Well, yes and no, depending on who you are. It's easy for me, someone who's used to VR, who enjoys using it, to say, go for it, this is a great piece of tech. Because it is, but we're so early in the VR life cycle that things just aren't quite that simple right now. Instead, I've actually come up with a couple of scenarios that should help you guys figure out if this VR headset really is right for you, or if you should give it a miss, for now. So, without wasting any time, meet Ryan. He's a VR enthusiast. He's tried them all. Valve Index, MetaQuest 2, even the Google Cardboard back in the day. You name it, he's played it. He enjoys PC gaming, but also has a PS5, and wants to get involved in the console VR scene too, regardless of budget. Yeah, he might be worried about the amount of accessible games right now, but he's here for the long haul. The PSVR 2 is a great option for him. Next up, meet Jules. She's a big console gamer and is already part of the PlayStation ecosystem with a PS5 at home. She's really excited by the tech and what Sony are offering in the future. She's got the budget and wants to try out VR for the first time. She's getting her hands on the PSVR 2. Finally, meet Ewan. He's a pretty casual gamer, but wants to try VR out. He games on a PS5, and he's really excited by the thoughts of VR and has the budget for a PSVR 2. But gaming isn't his biggest passion, and he's not too sure how much he's going to use it. I'd recommend he waits it out and sees how the future of VR pans out first. So, are you a Ryan, a Jules, or a Ewan? Obviously, there's a lot of other scenarios to factor in, but hopefully this has helped you get a little closer to your final decision. Like I said, I think there's definitely a place for VR console gaming in the future. Whether it's up there as a priority for everyone right now is a different question though. All I can guarantee is that the PSVR 2 is a huge step in the right direction for VR console gaming, and I can definitely see it making its way into more and more homes across the globe. It just hasn't hit its peak just yet. Although you might be disappointed with the amount of accessible games right now, or the lack of backwards compatible games from the original version, I genuinely do see things only getting better in the future. It's just going to take a bit of time to get there. But anyway guys, hopefully you enjoyed this one and it's helped you figure out whether the PSVR 2 is right for you. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.